It was a rainy night. While the world slept, fate dared to call her back to life through a forgotten sound, a piano playing inside an abandoned station. When she heard that melody, she told the driver to stop. Without a word, she stepped out into the rain, drawn by something even fear couldn't stop. There, before a stranger, playing with his eyes closed, she found the echo of everything she had tried to forget. And what she did next surprised even fate itself. The night poured over Paris like spilled ink, and the city breathed under the weight of the rain. Inside the Moreau mansion, silence had a name and a face. Viviana's. The woman who ruled the French underworld without ever raising her voice. The glass reflected her image like a funeral portrait, cold, perfect, untouchable. The city slept, but she didn't. Power pulsed beneath her skin. A reminder that she was still alive, though she no longer knew whether that was a blessing or a curse. The hallways held old echoes, footsteps that once belonged to someone who would never return. Her brother's portrait had been removed from the walls, and since then, no memory dared to fill that space. Everything about her was calculation, strategy, survival. No smiles, no mistakes. Men feared her gaze, and women envied her control. Yet behind those ice-colored eyes, a locked pain remained, and every time the wind hit the windows, it seemed to whisper that forgotten name. The piano in the main hall stayed covered by a grey sheet, like a body kept for mourning. Viviana hadn't touched it since the day when blood and music became one. Those notes, once familiar, had turned into ghosts. When she walked past it, she always looked away, as if facing the instrument would desecrate the memory. The melody her brother had composed, his last before death, still lived somewhere in her mind, echoing through nightmares and silences she kept trying to bury. Outside, the rain sounded like muffled applause. Each drop tapped the glass like a confession she refused to hear. The clock's hands moved slowly, dragging time along. While she remained still, trapped between a past that wouldn't return and a power that no longer sustained her. The city was hers, but her heart was not. Something inside her was broken, a crack invisible to all, hidden even beneath the empire she had built. Viviana stood and crossed the hall. Each step echoed like a silenced gunshot. Power had its price, and hers was silence. Her cool perfume filled the air, a reminder that love, for her, was a forbidden luxury. Dangerous romance was weakness. Matters of the heart, fatal distractions. Everything she felt, she had learned to bury under orders and deals. And yet, that night carried something different. Something that trembled through the seams of darkness. Outside, the driver waited. The black car gleamed under the rain like an extension of her will. Viviana descended the stairs slowly, the sound of her heels blending with distant thunder. When she opened the door, a cold gust swept through the corridor, and for an instant, she thought she heard a note, a single note of piano, faint as a sigh. Her body reacted before her mind could. The memory struck like a blow. Her brother smiling, the sound of music filling the house. And his promise, as long as there's melody, there will be return. She stopped in front of the car, her gaze fixed on the empty street. The rain seemed to guide her path, pushing her away from home. The driver waited for instructions, but Viviana said nothing. She simply got in, her face expressionless, and the car pulled away in silence. The hum of the engine was low, almost respectful, and the fogged-up window reflected a woman torn between her throne and the abyss. The city drifted by outside, distorted by the falling rain, like a dream on the edge of waking. Then she heard it again, the same sound, faint, distant, but unmistakable. A piano. An old melody, impossible, yet real. Viviana tilted her head, her eyes searching for the invisible. The driver glanced at her through the rearview mirror, waiting for direction. She just raised her hand, and the car slowed down. The sound was coming from somewhere nearby, maybe a station, maybe from her own past. The music was an invitation, and some invitations could not be ignored. The car stopped. Across the street, through the shadows and rusted iron, an old sign revealed a forgotten name, Montparnasse. A train station abandoned for years, sentenced to oblivion. The rain trickled down the letters as if trying to bring them back to life. Viviana held her breath. The melody continued, growing, calling. It was the same song, the one her brother played on the night he died. She opened the door and stepped out without a word. The sound of her heels sinking into puddles mixed with the distant echo of keys. The cold wind stung her face, but nothing could stop her. Every step revived a memory. Every note reopened a wound. The station's gate loomed ahead, tall and rusted. Viviana pushed it hard, and the screech of metal against the ground sounded like time itself crying out. The darkness inside was alive. Dust, concrete, echoes. And in the center of that emptiness, a faint light flickered like a heart refusing to die. The piano. The sound came from there, pure and unshaken. Viviana paused for a moment, her chest heavy, the air thin. Fear and longing collided, and she took another step. Fate doesn't call twice, and for the first time in years, she answered. The corridor smelled of rust and abandonment. The walls seemed to hold secrets, and with every step the echo returned pieces of her she thought were gone. The music grew clearer, stronger, closer. It was impossible, yet it was happening. Her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the notes. There was no mafia now, no empire, no power, only a woman and the sound that dared to awaken her. The wind stopped. Time did too. And Viviana, the queen of silence, walked toward the impossible. The echo of the piano turned into something alive, something beating. The rain outside ceased as if the entire world was holding its breath. And the moment she crossed the threshold of the old station, the silence that had once been her crown shattered into 1,000 pieces. A single sustained note filled the air, a note that seemed to hold all her pain, all her guilt, and every promise she had forgotten. And as the echo drifted through the hollow space, Viviana understood. The night hadn't ended. It had only begun to play. Dawn was falling over Paris like a worn-out veil, blending the sound of rain with the faint murmur of distant tracks. Viviana Moreau told the driver to stop. Her voice was barely a whisper, but he knew there was no room for questions. The car slowed down, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Outside, an old, improbable sound cut through the cold, the piano. The notes floated in the damp air, fragile yet precise, as if someone were trying to stitch the silence back together with melody. Viviana's eyes locked on the rusted gate of the Montparnasse station. That forgotten structure, abandoned by the city, seemed to breathe. A flicker of light slipped through a crack, pulsing like a trapped soul. The sound came from within, real, insistent. She stepped out of the car without a word. The rain clung to her hair, slid down her face, and the makeup gave way, revealing an expression the world hadn't seen in years. Wonder. The woman who ruled the city of shadows looked, for a fleeting second, like a sister trying to listen to the past. The entrance to the station was a tunnel through time. The air smelled of iron, memories, and decay. Each step echoed like a secret revealed too late. The melody guided her path, gentle, almost merciful. Viviana followed the sound, her fingers brushing the old handrail, each touch awakening a sleeping memory. The heart that had beaten for years in rhythm with fear now tried to match the pulse of the music. The power that had sustained her wavered before something stronger, the call of destiny. When she reached the grand hall, time seemed to fold in on itself. The faint glow of the streetlights filtered through the broken windows, painting golden streaks across the wet floor. In the center stood an old grand piano. Its chipped varnish reflected shadows that danced to the sound. And before it, a man. His back turned, wearing a worn coat, wet hair clinging to his neck. He played with his eyes closed, like a man in prayer. Each note seemed to rise from the air itself rather than the instrument. Viviana froze. For a heartbeat she couldn't breathe. That music, that melody, shouldn't exist outside her memory. It was the same song her brother used to play on winter nights before death crossed their home, the same rhythm, the same lament. For a moment, she thought she was caught in an illusion, but the man kept playing, and the notes seemed to know her. She took a step forward without realizing it. Dust lifted with the wind, forming a halo around him. He didn't notice her presence, or pretended not to. His hands glided across the keys with a tenderness almost divine, as if every chord were asking forgiveness for something. The scene was simple and sacred. Viviana, who had lived surrounded by fear, obedience, and power, felt her chest tightened into a silent knot. The sound broke through what was left of her defenses, as if her brother were speaking to her through another voice. The wind pushed the door open, making it creak. The man stopped playing, his hands suspended in the air, as though the silence itself had come alive. Slowly he turned his head, and when his eyes met hers, Viviana felt the ground vanish beneath her. He didn't look afraid, nor surprised. There was only a quiet sadness, the kind of calm that comes from someone who has already lost everything. His gaze seemed to recognize something in her, something she had long forgotten existed. For a moment, no one moved. The distant hum of the city was the only trace of time left. Viviana tried to speak, but her voice dissolved into the cold air. The man smiled, small, restrained, like someone who understood what couldn't be explained. He turned back to the piano and placed his hands on the keys. "I never learned this song," he murmured, without looking at her. "It came to me in a dream." The words cut through Viviana like an invisible blade. The echo of that sentence was almost too much to bear. She stepped closer, her heels scraping softly against the floor. The air around them seemed to vibrate, dense, electric, filled with something even fear couldn't name. She wanted to ask, "Who are you?" but her voice wouldn't come. The man began to play again, and the melody grew, more alive, more urgent. Each note told a story they both somehow knew, though they had never lived it together. Viviana closed her eyes. For a brief moment, she let the sound move through her. There, in that forgotten hall, the woman who had ruled empires found herself fragile, human, undone. The piano's voice was the only one daring to touch what no one else could reach. His name, Leon Carver, she would only learn later. In that moment, he was nothing but the keeper of a memory, the echo of something time had tried to erase. The air filled with golden dust, and the rain outside began to ease. Viviana took a deep breath, like someone resurfacing from a long dive. The music faded slowly. The last chord held until it died away. Leon lifted his gaze. "Why did you stop?" she finally managed to ask. He gave a faint, wistful smile. "Because every song needs silence to exist." And in that instant, Viviana understood. Fate had just opened the door she had sworn to keep locked. The night went still, her heart quickened. And the forgotten Montparnasse station came back to life, not for the city, but for the sound that dared to shatter the crown of the Queen of Silence. The music still lingered in the air, even after his hands had stopped. Viviana stood there, frozen, afraid that breathing might break the spell. Leon lowered his gaze, touched a single key at random, and the lonely note echoed through the empty space like a secret refusing to die. The station seemed to listen with her. The wind whispered through the cracks, and the rain outside tapped in rhythm with the piano, as if the whole world waited for the next note. Viviana took a step forward. The heel of her shoe clicked against the damp floor. A small sound, but it felt like the beginning of something inevitable. Leon slowly raised his face, his pale, weary eyes meeting hers. There was no fear there, only recognition. A recognition she couldn't explain, but one that set fire to something long asleep inside her. He seemed to see straight through her, past the iron walls she had built to survive. This song, her voice came out softer than she intended. "Where did you learn it?" Leon blinked, puzzled. His fingers hovered above the keys, ready to play, but he hesitated. I didn't learn it, he whispered. It came to me in a dream. I just played it. Viviana felt the air split in two. For a heartbeat, time fractured, and she was once again the little girl sitting beside her brother, listening to that same melody echo through the Moro house, the same tone of sorrow, the same pause between the notes. It was impossible, and yet it was happening. She moved closer, each step awakening memories that didn't belong to that place. The scent of wet wood mingled with the faint perfume of the flowers around her neck. Leon watched her, confused but unafraid. There was something unsettlingly calm about him, a serenity that disarmed. Viviana stopped close enough to hear his breath. "You dreamed about this?" she asked. He nodded, eyes lost in shadow. Every night, always the same piano, the same pain. The words struck her with a force her body couldn't hide. The same pain. It was as if fate was playing with language, binding two souls that were never meant to meet. She looked away, trying to gather herself, but the piano's echo still trembled inside her bones. Leon lowered his head and played again, just 3 notes. Simple, familiar, the same ones her brother used to play. Whenever he wanted to say, "I'm here," Viviana stepped back, her heartbeat quickening. The world seemed to spin slower, painted in new colors. That man wasn't just a pianist. There was something beyond understanding in him. An invisible thread stretched between them, her past and his present, pain and destiny. And when he began to play again, the sound became more than music. It was memory. It was revelation. She moved closer once more, this time without fear. The melody filled the air like a prayer without words. Leon played with his eyes closed, and Viviana felt as if he could see everything she had buried. Each note fell over her like a silent confession, stripping away what was left of her armor. The strength that had always defined her began to soften, and the Iron Woman allowed herself at last to simply listen. Outside, the rain grew heavier, drumming against the windows like distant applause. The sound blended with the music, weaving a kind of trance. Viviana closed her eyes, her skin tingling. It felt as though her brother was there, somewhere between them, guiding the encounter. Leon leaned forward, and the piano responded, as if recognizing the touch of an old friend. Viviana opened her eyes. "How do you know how to play this?" she asked, her voice trembling but steady. He looked up, almost childlike. "I don't," he said softly. "I just feel it." Then he smiled, a smile that asked for nothing yet offered everything. And in that moment, Viviana realized something inside her had begun to shift. A tiny crack, a faint reminder of humanity. His sound was healing what she thought could never be healed. The silence between the notes was almost louder than the music itself. She breathed carefully, afraid even a sigh might break the spell. The man before her didn't know who she was, didn't know the power she held, or the danger it carried. And somehow, that ignorance was freeing. For the first time in years, Viviana wasn't feared, desired, or obeyed, only heard. Leon ended the piece with a lingering chord, the echo spreading through the station like a divine whisper. "It's strange," he said, eyes still on the keys. "Every time I play, I feel like someone's listening with me." Viviana held back a breath. If only he knew how true that was. Her brother Adrain used to say the very same thing. Music is never alone, he would tell her, because love never dies in silence. The words echoed in Viviana's mind, carved there like a vow. She ran a hand through her hair, taking a deep breath, trying to steady the tremor in her hands. Leon didn't look away. "You know this song?" he asked, curious, almost shy. She hesitated, then gave a faint smile instead of answering. "I know who used to play it before you." He frowned, intrigued, but didn't press further. The tension in the air said enough. Viviana turned, walking a few steps across the hall, trying to regain control. The sound of the piano still lingered in her bones, and she knew nothing would ever be the same again. With every chord, the past returned, and with it, the memory of what had been lost. Leon rose slowly, his gaze following her movement. There was no challenge in it, no fear, only quiet respect. "You look scared," he said. She gave a short, humorless laugh. "It's not fear, it's memory." He smiled, understanding what she didn't say. "Memory is music too," he replied. Viviana looked at him with a mix of surprise and fascination. It was as if he had stolen the very words she'd kept hidden for years. For a brief moment she thought about leaving, running from all of it, but her feet refused to move. His sound, his presence, carried the exact weight of what destiny calls inevitable. Outside, the storm was beginning to fade. The drops fell slower, almost rhythmic, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. Viviana stepped closer until she stood beside the piano. Leon's fingers rested on the keys, still. "Keep playing," she said softly, barely audible. "Why?" he asked. "Because there's something in that music that hasn't finished yet." And without another word, Leon began to play again. The station seemed to breathe with the notes. The melody was the same, yet different, fuller, alive, pulsing with meaning. Viviana closed her eyes, feeling fate weave itself into the sound. Something larger than both of them was unfolding, something she couldn't control. The music, the wind, the memory, all of it conspired to bring them together. And in that moment, when the final chord dissolved into the air, Viviana knew whatever came next would never be coincidence. The emptiness Leon played wasn't emptiness at all. It was the precise space where lost souls found each other again. The station lights flickered as if time itself was breathing. Viviana stood still, her eyes fixed on Leon's hands resting on the piano. There was something in the way he played, a surrender she hadn't seen since her brother, a raw truth that cut through fear. The sound faded, and for a heartbeat everything went still. A thick silence filled the room, heavy with something that couldn't be named. Her heart beat in an unfamiliar rhythm, as if destiny had changed the tempo without asking permission. Leon lifted his gaze and met hers. There was no submission there, no defiance, only honesty. And that disarmed her more than any weapon ever could. "You don't belong here," he said, unaware of the danger in his words. Viviana raised an eyebrow, startled by his boldness. No one spoke to her that way. No one dared. But Leon didn't know who she was, and maybe that's why he said exactly what she needed to hear. She walked slowly, the sound of her heels echoing like the ticking of an old clock. She stopped in front of him, so close the air between them seemed to grow heavy. "How much do you want for a private performance?" she asked, cold and controlled, as if offering the world in exchange for silence. Leon let out a soft laugh, and that sound broke something inside her. "I don't play for money," he said. "I play for those who feel." His words struck Viviana like a spark against gunpowder. She studied him in silence, and a smile, the first in years, dared to form on her lips. It was a small gesture, but the station seemed to notice. The wind stirred, lifting dust and memory. Viviana turned to hide her face, but it was too late. Leon had seen it. The queen of silence, the woman who never smiled, had just been caught by her own heart. "Tomorrow," she said, regaining her composure, "you'll play for me. At my place." Her tone left no room for refusal, but Leon didn't move. "And if I don't want to?" The question hung in the air, bold, reckless. Viviana turned slowly, her gaze sharp as a blade. No one had ever challenged her like that. She took a step toward him, tension thick in the space between them. "You will want to," she whispered, her voice low, carrying something between a threat and a fascination. Leon held her gaze, though his heart beat faster. "I don't play for those who hide," he replied. The sound of his words echoed off the walls like quiet thunder. Viviana stopped. Silence claimed everything again. His defiance unsettled her, but it also drew her in a way she didn't understand. For the first time in years, someone wasn't afraid to stand before her. Leon's strength didn't come from power, but from soul. That was what confused her. That was what bound her. The piano, the sound, the man, it all felt like part of the same calling. She moved toward the piano, brushing her fingertips over one of the keys. The dull, out-of-tune note broke the tension for just a moment. "You've no idea who you're talking to," she said, her tone cool though her breath betrayed her control. Leon stepped closer. "I don't need to," he said softly. "What matters isn't the name. It's the sound." His reply echoed dangerously close. Viviana caught his scent mingling with hers, and for one suspended heartbeat, time, air, and fear all stopped. Her eyes hardened again, but they were no longer the same. Something new flickered there. A spark of life, an old fire reigniting. She placed an obscene amount of money on the piano, the folded bills perfectly aligned. "Tomorrow. At dusk," she said flatly. "I'll be waiting." Leon glanced at the money, then back at her. "I don't want your money," he said. "I want to know why you cried without tears." Viviana froze. The words fell like a verdict. He had seen what no one else ever could. Her world was built on masks, but to him they were glass. She tried to answer, but the air wouldn't come, only silence. Leon began to play again without asking, and the notes filled the space between them like a conversation reason could never translate. With every chord, something inside her shifted, cracked open. It was as if the piano were telling the story she had spent her life trying to bury. Leon played with his eyes closed, and Viviana watched him, unaware that she was crying without tears. The sound grew, soft yet fierce, until it became almost unbearable. She gripped the edge of the piano, trying not to break, but it was too late. The melody was speaking directly to the part of her that had once believed in love. When the final note faded, silence returned, thicker, heavier. Viviana took a deep breath and walked toward the exit. The echo of her heels filled the station like a farewell she couldn't bring herself to say. Leon didn't call out. He just watched her disappear into the shadows. Before vanishing completely, she glanced over her shoulder. Their eyes met once more, brief, intense, inevitable. Viviana slipped into the car without a word. The driver, tense, didn't dare ask. The window reflected her face, and for the first time her expression wasn't one of power, but of confusion. The music still echoed in her ears, and his laugh, light and defiant, lingered in her chest. The rain began again, and Paris resumed its usual rhythm, but something had changed. Leon remained in the station, alone. The notes replayed in his mind, and he couldn't explain what had just happened. The woman carved from marble had left him unsettled, curious, alive. He looked at the money on the piano and smiled. "Tomorrow," he murmured, "maybe I'll play. Or maybe she'll listen." And so, between music and silence, fate began to write its own score, a melody woven from power and vulnerability, from secrets and destiny, from love and redemption. And nothing would ever be the same after that night. The next morning rose wrapped in fog, as if Paris itself wanted to hide what had happened. The city felt suspended between dream and waking. Inside the Moreau mansion, silence was so thick, even the clock seemed afraid to mark the hours. Viviana stared at her reflection in the mirror. Distant eyes, sealed lips. The piano from the night before still echoed inside her, stubbornly, like a confession the body refused to forget. The music had broken through her defenses, trespassed the space where only her brother had ever lived, and that left her exposed. In the garden, the flowers bent under the weight of the mist. The fog slipped through the open windows, bringing with it the scent of earth and memory. Viviana walked slowly down the main corridor, dressed in black, the heavy fabric dragging an old melancholy behind her. The servants avoided her gaze, sensing something inevitable in the air. She descended the staircase like someone walking toward judgment. Fate had knocked on her door, and she, foolish or brave, had answered. At 5 o'clock, the mansion gates opened. Leon arrived quietly, eyes curious, hands still marked by the music. He looked out of place among the marble and golden chandeliers, a single note in a symphony of excess. One of the guards escorted him into the grand hall, where the piano waited, still covered with the mourning cloth her brother had left years ago. When the fabric was lifted, a fine layer of dust rose into the light, dancing between memory and oblivion. Viviana watched from a distance, motionless. Leon looked at the instrument, and for a brief moment, he seemed to hesitate. He touched the keys gently, like someone trying to wake a sleeping body. The sound came out rough, broken, but soon began to take shape. The notes filled the hall, climbing the cold walls, brushing against old portraits, breaking the stiffness of their frames. It was as if the house itself recognized the melody. The song he chose wasn't just any tune, it was an old one, a sequence of chords known only to the Moro family. Viviana straightened, her fingers tightening around the armrest, her heart pounded. "Who taught you that?" she asked, her voice almost trembling. Leon paused, confused. "No one," he said. "These songs. They come from memories, but they're not mine." The air between them seemed to shrink. She stood, walked a few steps, and stopped beside the piano. Her hands trembled slightly, and her eyes held something between fear and reverence. It was as if she was staring at a ghost. With every note, the walls seemed to breathe. The sound spread like an old perfume, reviving a presence she had spent years trying to bury. Her brother, Adrain, used to play that same sequence before leaving for the family's secret meetings. The melody was a signal, a code between them. And now, here, before Leon, the same sound echoed again, reborn from hands that had never learned it. It was impossible, but Viviana knew. Nothing about this was coincidence. Leon kept playing, unaware of the storm he had unleashed inside her. The notes softened, grew more intimate. The woman who had controlled everything now found herself ruled by something she couldn't measure or command. The music brought back memories too vivid to bear, her brother's laughter, the scent of wine and gunpowder, the distant echo of gunfire on that cursed night. Her legs weakened and she leaned against the piano, the cold marble grounding her trembling body. "Stop!" she ordered, but her voice came out faint. Leon obeyed, puzzled. "Why does this song scare you so much?" he asked. Viviana drew a deep breath, searching for an answer that wouldn't expose her soul. "Because it carries too many dead," she said at last, her gaze lost somewhere beyond time. The silence that followed was heavier than any sound. Leon didn't insist. He simply looked at her, with the kind of understanding that doesn't need words. The clock on the wall struck 6. The sound of the chimes sliced through the air, and Viviana closed her eyes for a moment. Each strike pulled her back to the past, to the night her brother was killed, when the piano fell silent forever. Leon rose, his hands still trembling. "Did you know music can hold memory?" he said, breaking the stillness. "Sometimes it survives where remembrance dies." Viviana looked at him with a mixture of anger and awe. "And what do you think this one remembers?" she asked. Leon smiled softly, almost mournfully. "I think it's waiting for someone who never came back." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning beyond comprehension. For a heartbeat, Viviana wanted to hate him, but what she felt instead was the opposite. It was as if fate had chosen his face to return what she had fought so long to forget. The rain began again, soft and slow, tapping against the windows with the gentleness of old fingers. Leon sat back at the piano. This time he didn't look at her, yet every note seemed to know exactly where to find Viviana's heart. The sound filled the space between duty and desire, between power and regret. The woman who had ruled through strength was now ruled by something invisible and far more dangerous. The lights in the hall flickered. The wind made the curtains move like ghosts. Viviana took a step forward, her eyes fixed on him. "Why did you come to me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Leon smiled faintly, never breaking the melody. "I don't think I came," he said. "I think the music brought me." She wanted to respond, but the sound of the notes cut her off, and it was better that way. Some truths don't need to be spoken when they're already being played. As he played, something inside her began to shift. The hardness gave way to a sweet kind of pain, almost bearable. No tears fell, but her eyes shone with light. Leon looked at her briefly and saw what no one else could. A woman tired of carrying the weight of her throne. When the last note echoed, The silence felt sacred. Viviana took a deep breath, and for the first time, she didn't run from what she felt. Time stopped inside that room. The music was no longer sound. It had become living memory, the invisible thread binding past to present. Leon lifted his hands from the keys, and the final echo faded into the old walls. Viviana closed her eyes and whispered something he couldn't understand. A prayer, perhaps, or the name of the one she lost. When she opened her eyes, the world felt different. The melody still trembled inside her, like an unfulfilled promise. Leon watched in silence, unwilling to break the spell. And there, in the space between the last note and the first breath, fate began to write the next movement, the one where the past would stop being memory and become revelation. The night returned heavy, as if the sky itself wanted to warn that nothing would be simple after that afternoon. Viviana didn't sleep. The piano still echoed inside her, each note pulling a buried memory back to the surface. Sitting by the fire, she watched the flames dance, the light flickering in her eyes as if trying to expose what she hid. The wind slipped through the cracks of the mansion, carrying the echo of a melody that no longer belonged to the present. She tried to resist, but fate no longer asked for permission. It simply advanced. The next morning, the butler entered with a restrained expression. "Madame Moreau." "There's a visitor." Viviana lifted her eyes slowly, expressionless. "He said he's the musician." The words echoed through the hall like a reminder of what she should have forgotten. Leon entered, calm-eyed, his hands tucked in his coat pockets. The contrast was almost cruel. He seemed light, alive, while she bore the weight of an empire and a guilt the world would never know. "Why did you come back?" she asked. "Because the sound didn't stop calling me," he replied. Viviana held his gaze, though something inside her faltered. Leon walked to the piano, touched the keys gently, and the dry sound filled the room. "This house has music in its walls," he said softly, "but it also has pain." The words struck deeper than they should have. She turned away, trying to contain the anger, not at him, but at herself, for letting him reach her. "You talk too much for a man who doesn't understand what he sees," she said coldly. Leon smiled, without irony. "Maybe I understand more than you think." He placed an old, yellowed folder on the piano, something that looked as if it had been rescued from another time. "I found this at the station," he said. Among the debris there was a sheet of music signed Adrien Moreau. Viviana froze. The name cut through the air like a blade. She stepped closer, slowly, her eyes fixed on the letters that hadn't been spoken aloud in years. "Let me see." Her hands trembled as she unfolded the paper. The handwriting was unmistakable, her brother's. The notes were fragmented, scribbles scattered between staves. But what truly stole her breath was the line written at the bottom, "If I die, the music will go on." For a moment, the ground vanished beneath her. Leon watched in silence, careful not to disturb what he didn't fully understand. "My father worked with musicians for many years," he said quietly. "I think he knew your brother." The mention of his father's name sparked something inside her, a flicker caught between pain and revelation. Leon's father had been one of the musicians who played for the Moreau family before the massacre. A discreet, gifted man who disappeared the same night Adrien was killed. "He was there?" Viviana asked, her voice barely a whisper. Leon nodded. "He was the last one to play that night. He told me stories about a melody that should never be forgotten." Viviana's gaze hardened. "And that melody," Leon continued, "was a warning." The memory struck her like lightning. Her brother running down the corridors, the echo of hurried footsteps, the piano playing an urgent sequence. Adrien had created a code, a secret melody meant to warn of betrayal, a musical password shared between the Moreau family and their allies. That night, the signal was supposed to be played. But the musician, Leon's father, disappeared before finishing the sequence. The ambush came, and Adrien died, believing the warning would never reach them. Viviana closed her eyes, her body trembling. "So he knew," she murmured. Leon looked at her with quiet sorrow. My father carried that guilt until the end. He died never knowing why the music stopped that night. She lifted her gaze, a single tear threatening to fall, but vanishing before it could. The music didn't stop, she said, her voice breaking. It just arrived too late. The silence that followed was too heavy even for the mansion's walls. Leon sat at the piano and began to play the same passage from the score. The notes were shaky, imperfect, yet filled with meaning. Viviana stood still, watching, her face bathed in the firelight. Each sound brought a memory back to life. Her brother's laughter, the smell of gunpowder, the sound of footsteps she would never hear again. When Leon finished, he looked up at her. "I think this music belongs to you," he said, sliding the score toward her. She hesitated, then stepped closer, taking the paper by its fragile edges. The rough texture, the scent of dust, the weight of history, it all made her tremble. "My brother used to say every note carried a message," she whispered. "He believed music was the only place where the soul speaks without lying." Leon stepped closer to her. "Then maybe this is the message he left for you." His words shattered something inside her. Viviana drew a long breath, trying to hold back the tide of emotion, but control slipped through her fingers like sand. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "That message killed me along with him." Leon didn't answer. He simply stood there, close enough for her to feel his warmth, yet distant enough to honor her pain. The storm outside roared, mirroring the chaos within her. The fire flickered, casting shifting shadows that danced between them. Viviana looked at Leon with something caught between gratitude and despair. "Why did you bring this to me?" she asked. He paused, thinking, then said, "Because sometimes fate doesn't want to be forgotten." The line hung in the air, simple and devastating. She turned her face away, her gaze lost in the flames. The memory of her brother returned, his smile, their last night, the music that should have saved him, the silence that killed him. Everything was back. The past had come to collect its debt. Leon stepped back, giving her space, but something had already been sealed. They were bound now, not by choice, but by inheritance. Viviana closed her eyes and let the sheet slip from her hands. The paper fell to the floor, the dull sound echoing through the hall. She placed a hand against her chest, feeling her heart beating unevenly. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered. Leon lowered his eyes. "Maybe not," he said softly. "But the music brought me." When he turned to leave, she called out, her voice weaker than she wished. "Leon!" He stopped without looking back. "That melody, can you finish it?" He smiled but said nothing. He simply returned to the piano, and the first chords filled the air once more. And in that sound, fate began to breathe again. The final note lingered in the air, trembling between them like an unspoken promise. And in the silence that followed, Viviana understood. The past wasn't over. It had only been waiting to be heard to the very end. Dawn came sick and pale, wrapped in fog that swallowed the city and blurred the edges of the world. Viviana Moreau hadn't slept. Adrian's sheet music lay open on the piano like a wound that refused to close. The fire in the hearth had died, and the cold had taken over the hall. The clock marked hours that seemed not to exist. She rose and walked to the piano, running her fingers over the paper, feeling the weight of the promise she had failed to keep. Her brother's face came to mind, and his voice, faint, distant, repeated, "If I die, the music will go on." But now, that echo sounded like an accusation. Leon had left before dawn, silent, as if he knew she needed the emptiness to think. The house was hollow, but his sound remained, imprinted in the walls. Viviana pressed one key, just one, and the cold note reverberated like a lament. She wanted to destroy the piano, to shatter the keys, to silence what was driving her mad. But she couldn't. Instead, she sat down and cried quietly, her face in her hands. Outside, the wind whistled like an unfinished melody. Hours later, the guards noticed the front door was open. A thin rain soaked the carpet at the entrance. Viviana was gone. She left no orders, no destination, only the uncovered piano and the sheet signed Adrien. When Leon heard the news, a chill ran through him. He had promised himself never to return to that place, but the call was stronger than his fear. He grabbed his coat and went back to Montparnasse station, the only place where sound still made sense. The city slept when he arrived. The old gate groaned as he pushed it open, the cold air rushing in like a memory. Inside, the same silence greeted him, the same smell of rust and abandonment. Leon walked through the shadows toward the old piano, the same one he had played the night he met her. He sat down, his hands trembled. He knew something was waiting for him there. And then he saw it. Between the debris, hidden beneath a cracked floorboard, a piece of sheet music. The paper was fragile, yellowed, nearly crumbling. In the corner, the same name, Adrien Moreau. But there was something else. At the bottom, a handwritten note, different from the rest. If I die, the music will go on, and whoever hears it will know what was forgotten. Leon ran his fingers over the words and felt the weight of the message. It wasn't just a composition, it was a confession. Adrien had hidden a secret in sound, something only to be understood when played by someone who didn't belong to that house. He knew what he had to do. He brushed the dust from the keys and began to play, following the notes on the page. The music was sorrowful, yet alive. Each chord lit a spark in the darkness, as if the walls themselves had begun to breathe again. The windows vibrated and the sound rose, echoing beneath the cracked ceiling. The station, once dead, now pulsed with the rhythm of the song. Leon played with his whole being, eyes closed, heart bare. Outside, the city was waking, and in that moment, Viviana appeared, drenched, exhausted, her hair undone, her eyes red. She moved along the platform like a ghost finally finding her own grave. The sound of the piano guided her, pulling her back from the edge. When she saw Leon, she stopped, standing at the entrance, watching him play as if witnessing her own redemption. Leon sensed her presence, but didn't stop. He kept playing, knowing this was the only language they both understood. Viviana moved closer, each step a forgiveness her body wasn't ready to give. When she reached him, he lifted his gaze. Neither spoke. The sound said everything. The notes danced between them, carrying both pain and healing in the same rhythm. Viviana placed her hands over his, stopping the music. The silence that followed was almost unbearable. "Why did you come back?" she asked, her voice rough. "Because the sound wouldn't let me go," he replied. She took a trembling breath, holding back the tears. "My brother died, believing the warning never reached us. Now I know it did. Just too late." Leon tightened his hold on her hands. "Then it wasn't in vain," he said softly. "He's still here." She closed her eyes, and the tears came. For the first time in years, Viviana cried without fear. She cried as someone who says goodbye and begins again all at once. "I hated him for so long," she whispered. "And I hated the world for taking everything." Leon watched her in silence, and when she finally looked at him, there was tenderness in his eyes. "Maybe he didn't die to be forgotten," he said. "Maybe he died so you would remember." The words hung between them, and the pain gave way to something softer, a kind of peace. Viviana let go of his hands and stepped back. "I don't know how to forgive," she said. "Then start by playing," Leon replied. She hesitated, glancing from the piano to him. At last she sat beside him and pressed a single key. Then another. The third came with a quiet sob. Leon joined her, and soon the two were playing together, the sound rising, blending what remained of pain with what was being born as hope. The music filled the space like a breath of life. The station glowed with a gentle light as dawn broke. Viviana's face softened, and the armor that had defined her began to crumble. Leon looked at her and saw the woman the world had never known, not the Queen of Silence, but the woman who had learnt to listen again. When the last note faded, she kept her hands on the keys, her gaze lost in nothing. I can't change the past, she murmured. No one can, he said softly. But we can change the sound that comes after. The wind drifted through the cracked window, carrying the music away. Viviana drew a deep breath, and the weight she carried seemed to lift for a moment. She looked at Leon and smiled, brief, shy, but real. Thank you, she whispered. He shook his head. Don't thank me. I only played what was already inside you. The station fell silent. It was no longer the same silence. It was the kind that comes after a storm, when the world exhales in relief for having survived. Viviana rose, walked to the door, and looked at the grey sky as it began to brighten. The rain had stopped. Forgiveness wasn't an act, it was a melody. And for the first time, she was ready to hear it all the way through. The sun rose timidly, hidden behind clouds still heavy with traces of the storm. Montparnasse station looked different now. Light filtered through the broken windows, spreading like golden dust across the piano and the two weary figures who had spent the night in silence. Viviana and Leon sat side by side, saying nothing. The music that had once filled the air now lived between them, invisible yet alive, as if every breath were a sustained note. Forgiveness had begun, but love still waited for its time. Viviana looked around. The place that had once been ruin now seemed to breathe. The walls, once grey, reflected a gentle glow. The air, once cold, carried warmth, something living. Leon still sat at the piano, his fingers resting on the keys, his gaze far away. He didn't move, but he seemed to hear something she couldn't. Do you hear it? He asked without turning. Viviana frowned. Hear what? Leon smiled faintly. The sound after the sound. She didn't answer, but she felt it. A soft echo, almost imperceptible, like the heart remembering how to beat. Stepped closer. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from something she hadn't felt in a long time. Emotion. The wind swept through the side of the station, lifting her hair. And the moment looked like a painting come to life. The woman who had once been queen of silence, standing before the man who dared to give her back her pulse. Leon looked at her, and for a heartbeat the world went still. No mafia, no empire, no pain, only two survivors of themselves. Viviana knelt beside the piano, her eyes fixed on the keys. My brother used to say music was the purest form of love, she whispered. Leon lowered his gaze, his voice barely more than a breath. And do you believe that? She gave a faint, sorrowful smile. I believe you only truly love when it hurts. The words hung in the air. He reached out, brushing his fingers lightly against hers, a simple gesture that carried the weight of everything left unsaid. And in that silent touch, the reunion happened, not between two people, but between two souls that had remembered each other. Outside, the rain began again, soft and rhythmic, like restrained applause. Viviana rose and began walking through the station, the sound of her heels blending with the patter of water. I spent my whole life trying to forget, she said, her voice steady but low. And when I finally did, fate brought me back to where it all began. Leon watched her, a quiet reverence in his eyes, the kind reserved for witnessing a miracle. Maybe fate just wanted to give you back what was yours, he said softly. Viviana stopped in front of a wall covered in faded graffiti. She touched the chipped paint and smiled. Nothing's mine anymore, Leon. I've lost everything. He stood and walked toward her, stopping just inches away. Not everything, he said, his tone gentle. You still have the sound. And sound always returns to those who understand it. The words betrayed him because the way he looked at her was no longer compassion, it was love. Quiet, restrained, but real. She turned her face away but didn't step back. The wind carried his scent, and the world seemed to stop. There was something dangerous in that silence, the kind of danger one doesn't run from. Leon lifted his hand and brushed a strand of hair from her face. Viviana closed her eyes, and the touch lasted exactly as long as the space between a chord and the silence that follows. When she opened them, there were tears, but also light. Why do you keep staying? she asked. Because someone has to finish the melody your brother began, he replied. His words hit deep. He returned to the piano, and she, unable to resist, followed. Leon began to play, and Viviana watched him, feeling every note move through her like breath. The music grew, and with it something inside her began to unravel. Fear, grief, guilt. The tears came easily, and she let them fall, without shame, without resistance. Leon played without looking at her, as if he could feel her heartbeat in the rhythm. When the song ended, Viviana stepped behind him and wrapped her arms around his shoulders. A quiet, unexpected embrace. It was a hug without promises, but full of truth. "Thank you for not giving up on playing," she said, her voice trembling. Leon held her hands, still facing forward. "Music brought me here," he said. "And now, it's you who keeps me here." She closed her eyes and rested her face against his shoulder. For the first time in years, the silence inside her didn't hurt. It rested. The sun broke through suddenly, spilling golden light through the cracked windows. The dust in the air shimmered like a blessing. Viviana lifted her face, and the glow made her eyes look alive again. "This song was our signal," she said softly. "When I was a child, Adrian told me that when the pain became too heavy, I should listen for it. And he'd come for me." Leon looked at her and smiled gently. Then he did. He just used my hands to play. Time seemed to stop. Their eyes met, and for the first time Viviana didn't pull away. There was something sacred in that moment, the kind of love that doesn't begin, only awakens. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat. "I thought I'd never feel anything again." Leon took her hand gently. "Sometimes," he said softly, "music just needs silence to begin again." Outside, the clouds parted and sunlight flooded the station. The golden glow washed over the piano, their faces, their tears. The reunion was complete, not between past and present, but between pain and love. Viviana took a deep breath, and that breath seemed to echo across the whole city. And in that instant, without saying another word, she knew what had once been born of grief was now becoming redemption. Afternoon fell over Paris in a golden haze, a light that seemed made only for them. Montparnasse station was quiet, but no longer empty. The piano, now clean, seemed to breathe beneath the soft light of evening. Viviana walked slowly between the abandoned tracks, the sound of her heels echoing like the rhythm of a calm heart. Leon watched from a distance, sitting on the stone steps, a faint smile on his face. The wind swept her hair back, and for a moment, it all felt like a dream. The kind life rarely allows to those who learn to suffer too soon. Viviana stopped and looked toward the horizon. "My brother believed power was everything," she said, her voice calm but tinged with sadness. "And I believed him. That's why I lost everything I loved." Leon rose and approached slowly. "Power isn't evil," he said. "It's only dangerous when it comes without a soul." She looked at him, her gaze a confession. "And do you think there's still a soul left in me, Leon?" He smiled faintly. I heard it play. The words lingered between them, floating in the warm air of late afternoon. Viviana breathed deeply and stepped closer. Her eyes, once cold, now held the light of someone finally allowing herself to exist. "For years I measured life in losses," she confessed. "But you taught me to listen to what remained." Leon lowered his gaze, emotion flickering in his expression. "I only played what you kept in silence." She walked back to the piano, running her fingers over the keys without pressing them. "My brother died because of the power I tried to keep," she said softly. "And you reminded me I still have a soul." Leon approached, unhurried. His presence was gentle but steady. Viviana reached into her pocket and placed a small golden box atop the piano. Inside was the money she had once offered him that first night. "This is yours," she said. "I don't want it," he replied. "It's not about what I receive. It's about what I hear." She closed the box and pushed it back toward him. Then take it as a reminder of everything I never found the courage to say. Leon stared at the object in silence. It was more than money. It was surrender. Viviana watched him with a newfound calm, a tenderness the world had never seen in her. I want to ask you for something different, she said. Don't play for me for payment. Play to remind me. Leon lifted his gaze. Remind you of what? She smiled. A pure, quiet smile, almost childlike. Of who I was before I forgot what it felt like to feel. The wind passed between them, carrying the sounds of distant voices, of birds, and of a city learning to breathe again. Leon sat at the piano and began to play. The notes rose like prayers, slow, luminous, pure. Viviana closed her eyes and let the sound envelop her. It was a different kind of music. Not sad, not joyful, simply true. Each note seemed to cleanse a piece of the past, to pull the thorns from her soul. Her face softened, and her trembling hands were not from fear, but from release. When the melody ended, silence came like an embrace. Viviana opened her eyes and walked toward him. Do you know what this song means? She asked. Leon looked down at the piano, then back at her. It means there's no more pain between us. She nodded slowly. And that love no longer needs to be forbidden. The words surprised her as much as they did him. It wasn't an invitation, nor a promise of forever. It was a truth. The kind of love born from forgiveness, not desire. Leon stood and gently took her hand. So this is it? He asked. This is it, she said. I'm giving up the empire, the crown, everything that made me forget the sound of life. He smiled, his gaze bright with warmth. And what will you do with the silence? Viviana breathed deeply. Turn it into music. Outside, the afternoon surrendered to dusk. The city began to light up, one window at a time. The golden light merged with the shadow, and the world seemed to watch in reverent stillness as a new promise was born. Leon and Viviana stood hand in hand before the piano, while time itself seemed to pause. The wind carried the faint sound of cathedral bells, their echo rippling through the air like a divine sign. Viviana looked at him and smiled. If one day I forget all of this, promise me something. Leon tilted his head slightly. What? She looked straight into his eyes, calm and steady. Play again, and bring me back. He smiled, deeply moved. I promise. And there, between sound and silence, the queen of the underworld sealed her redemption, not with power, nor with words, but with the promise of a song that would never again be forgotten. Winter came gently, wrapping Paris in a veil of pale light. The cold ruled the streets, but inside Montparnasse station, the warmth came from somewhere else. The windows were clear, the piano restored, and the air carried the soft sound of rehearsals and laughter. Months had passed since the night the silence broke. Viviana Moreau and Leon Carver, once strangers bound by grief, now shared a destiny born from music itself. The station, once abandoned, had become a sanctuary, a new home for sound and for love. Viviana stood on the mezzanine, looking down at the hall. The preparations for the charity concert were nearly complete. Lights hung from the ceiling, and children ran between the benches, laughing. The place that had once been ruined now pulsed with life. She took a deep breath. Every detail, every sound, was a reminder that the past had not been erased, only transformed. Leon was at the piano, guiding the musicians through the final chords. His gaze lifted to find her among the crowd, and for a moment, time bent again. There was an understanding between them that needed no words. As the audience settled, the murmurs faded, and Viviana descended the stairs. She wore a simple black dress, no jewels, no crown. The woman who once ruled through shadows now walked in the light. She stepped onto the stage beside Leon, and the silence that followed was reverent. Leon looked at her and smiled. "Are you ready?" he whispered. Viviana's answer was calm, steady. For the first time, yes, the concert began. The first notes filled the hall like the dawn of a new day. The piano, guided by Leon's hands, seemed to speak with the violin, with the winds, with the hearts of those listening. Viviana played beside him, and each chord carried the memory of all that had been: fear, guilt, loss, and redemption. The audience listened in complete silence, as if witnessing a sacred confession. Tears came easily, and no one knew exactly why. It was as if everyone recognized, somewhere deep inside, the pain that the music was trying to heal. In the middle of the performance, Viviana looked down at the piano and felt something familiar. Her hands trembled, not from fear, but from emotion. She remembered Adrien, the brother she had loved, the man who died believing that music could save what power had destroyed. And now she knew he was right. The music had survived everything: her, the guilt, the years. "My brother used to say that music is the only way to confess without words," she whispered into the microphone, and the audience held its breath. "Today I understand." Leon looked at her, deeply moved. He kept playing, and Viviana let the sound carry her. The tears came freely, and she smiled. It was the end of one story, the beginning of another. The piano glowed beneath the amber lights, as if Adrien himself were playing beside them, unseen, yet present. The final notes rose into the high ceiling, through the glass and out into the sky, and outside snow began to fall. The audience stood in silence before the applause began. It was powerful, yet gentle, like rain against an old window. Viviana took a deep breath and looked at Leon. He reached out his hand and she took it, firmly, truthfully. The applause grew louder, but in that moment only the sound between them existed. A sound that spoke of love, forgiveness, and renewal. Outside, Paris was turning white. The snow fell softly, blessing everything it touched. The reflection of the concert lights danced across the streets, and the music of the piano lingered in the air, carried by the wind. Viviana closed her eyes for a moment, felt the cold on her face, and smiled. The Queen of Silence had learned to listen. When the final note faded into the air, peace settled over the station. The audience wept, some embraced, and Leon, still at the piano, bowed his head in reverence. Viviana looked up toward the ceiling and whispered her brother's name, as if returning her heart to time itself. Outside, the city seemed to answer with a faint, tender chord. And so, beneath the falling snow, their story finally found its rest. She once lived in the sound of gunfire. He lived in the echo of notes. When they met, the world fell silent, and love began to play. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that love can still heal what time cannot erase, leave a comment below. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. There are many more stories of deep love, redemption, and destiny waiting for you.